Hello and welcome to the Have You Seen podcast, brought to you by Dave on Film. I'm Dave, and I'd like to thank you first of all for downloading and listening to my ramblings. If you've not done so already, feel free to subscribe, give us a share to spread the word, and comment away or even get in touch with the show. You can email me on daveonfilmreviews@gmail.com or comment wherever you're listening to this podcast, or drop me a message on my socials, which are all in the description of this episode. Let's be honest, it's pretty easy to find me. It's been a while since the last episode, so there's plenty to catch up on. I'll be talking about some of the bigger films that I've been seeing recently, as well as going through this week's current top 10 in the UK box office. And I've actually seen 7 of them this week, so there's plenty to talk about with you. So let's get into it. First up at number 10 in the UK box office chart is Anaconda. Now, this is one of the ones I haven't had a chance to be able to see at the cinema yet, but if I do get to find some time, I'll pop along and watch it. It's a story of a group of friends who decide to remake the 1997 Anaconda film, and they take a film crew off to the jungle where everything goes wrong and ends up leading them into a fight for survival with an actual killer anaconda. It seems like it's quite a good fun film, although I've not been seeing amazing reviews of it. It's got Jack Black, Paul Rudd, Steve Zahn and Thandie Newton in the main roles. If you have seen it, let me know what you thought and I'll get your thoughts on to next week's show. At number 9 is the Spongebob movie, Search for Squarepants. In this film version of the Nickelodeon cartoon, Spongebob has a dream of riding all the big roller coasters at the theme park. And when he awakens to find he's grown ever so slightly overnight, so he's now tall enough to ride the big boy rides, he heads off with his friend Patrick Star to finally experience the thrill of the roller coasters, until he gets there and realises that he's a little bit too scared to do any of them. So then he realises he wants to become a swashbuckler like his boss Mr. Krabs, and ends up awakening the ghost of the Flying Dutchman, voiced by Mark Hamill. The Dutchman tells SpongeBob that to become a swashbuckler, he must complete some trials and blow the magic pipe that will prove that he's good enough, but obviously that pipe is the pipe that would free the Dutchman and trap SpongeBob for all of eternity. Now, I've never been a big fan of SpongeBob. I've seen the cartoon a fair few times when I was younger, but it's never been really one that's properly grabbed me. My girlfriend Jodie absolutely loves it, and she's often quoting entire scenes from the show, but it's just one that's never really floated my boat, so to speak. Pardon the pun. It falls into a similar kind of category of cartoon as things like Ren and Stimpy, Cat Dog and Rocko's Modern Life for me, which I always remember watching, but never really enjoying that much. They were all a little bit too outlandish for me. You know, give me some of the like more serious ones like Inspector Gadget or Count Duckula, who, even though they're ludicrous in themselves, I used to really enjoy them. But I did fairly enjoy this film. It raises a fair few laughs, usually from Patrick just being Patrick, and there is a decent storyline which isn't that hard to follow and is engaging. There's also plenty of jokes in there which are definitely not aimed at kids. For example, when characters get scared, they literally shit a brick. Stuff like that did make me laugh, so all in all, it's not a bad film. Jodie, however, did say that it was nowhere near as good as the original SpongeBob movie. Now, I've had a little bit of correspondence in about SpongeBob from my good friend Thomas Pitts, and I'm going to read his email out. If you want to email the show, you can do. It's daveonfilmreviews@gmail.com, and that's exactly what Thomas has done here. He says, "Yo, I've been a huge fan of SpongeBob for years, literally more than 20. For me, it's the perfect mix of silliness and surrealism, so of course, it was the ideal thing to introduce to my silly and surreal 6-year-old. Wonder where he gets his personality from. And he adores SpongeBob too. He's been ready to watch his film for ages. He always comes out of a film with a list of things to see in the future. Trailers heavily influence him. Zootropolis 2 and Frozen 3 have been on his watch list for a while now. Anyway, onto this film, the 4th big screen outing for the little yellow sponge. I loved it, end of. It's full of silly jokes, little things that pass you by if you're not paying attention, plenty that my boy will have missed. SpongeBob and Patrick, my favourite, end up visiting the underworld. It's full of weird and wonderful predators. There is a little bit of mild peril. They're accompanied by the Flying Dutchman, a relatively scary type who has appeared now and then in the cartoon. Mr. Krabs and Squidward follow them in a Winnebago with a cheeky little joke that goes, "We can't lose in a Winnebago." Mr. Krabs has a list of passcodes, like things like Mum's shell phone. He answers the phone with "Shello." It's all like that, thick and fast, joyous and cheery. A lack of sandy cheeks or many other of the other characters. Plankton's literally in there for about 10 seconds. Doesn't hamper things. Both of them have essentially got their own films anyway in the Squarepants verse. It's not a Christmas film by any means, but it really made our day when we watched the boys' review. It was great. So thank you, Thomas, for that. It's great that your boy's loving going to the cinema at 6 years old. I remember taking Althea to watch things at that age, and she loved every minute of it. And now she's always asking me if I'll take her to see things. I don't know where she gets that from either. So that is number 9 in the UK box office top 10, and that is the SpongeBob movie, Search for Squarepants. At number 8 is The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. So all 3 extended versions of the Lord of the Rings films are back in cinemas, which is great, because there's an entire generation of people who've not seen those films who will now actually be able to enjoy them on the big screen for the first time. It's been 25 years since Fellowship of the Ring were first in cinemas, and that makes me feel so old. I went to see it back then, and initially I didn't like it. I thought it was boring and uninteresting, and I didn't actually go to see Two Towers on the big screen. And it wasn't until my granddad had been at my uncle's and watched the first one on TV, and he came back and he said, "I've been watching this film called Lord of the Rings." And I was like, "Oh yeah," and he went, "I want to watch, apparently there's a second one," and Two Towers had just come out on DVD, and I went, "Well, if you want to watch it, I'll rent it." So we rented it on DVD and watched it, and I really enjoyed it, and he did too, and so I went back to watch Fellowship again, and I reappraised it, realising it were actually a lot better than I thought it was on that initial viewing. And then I'll always remember going with my mum and my granddad to see Return of the King on the big screen and kind of finishing off that big saga in style. Some really good memories there. And it's back in cinemas, so if you want to take people who may have not seen it yet and want to introduce a new generation to the Lord of the Rings films, now is the perfect opportunity to do it on the big screen. Just bear in mind, it is the extended versions, so there is a lot of film to get through. If you have introduced somebody to the Lord of the Rings films and you want to talk about them, get in touch. I've given the email before, but it's daveonfilmreviews@gmail.com, or contact me on the socials and tell me what they make of them. At number 7 in the UK box office top 10 is Rental Family. Director Hikari brings us Rental Family, the brand new Brendan Fraser film set around the world of rental families, something which has kind of been around in Japan since the 80s. Brendan Fraser plays Philip Vanderplug, a down-on-his-luck actor who moved from the USA 7 years ago to find his fame in Japan. Unfortunately, he's been stuck in a bit of a rut, making embarrassing adverts that were popular, but quite embarrassing, and he never really hit his big break. As he continues to struggle, he's offered an opportunity to join a rental family company where his role will be to take on a personality of, or the persona of, whoever the client wants him to be, and he will integrate himself into their lives and ultimately fill in the gaps for them. So initially he's a stand-in performer at a fake funeral, and he gets cast as the token white American. He struggles to find out how he'll connect with anyone to start with, and then when he gets his first major job, to be a fake husband to help a young bride escape from her family who has already married a woman, but she doesn't want to bring shame on the family. He kind of struggles with it and he doesn't really want to do it, but eventually he goes through with it and realises that he can change these people's lives for the better and enhance his own too. One of the major jobs that he takes on in the film is posing as a journalist who has been tasked with the job of writing the life story of an aging Japanese actor played by Akira Imoto, who is suffering from dementia and wants to commit his life story to words whilst he's still got the facility to do so. He also takes on another prominent job where he will become the long missing father of a young child, and he's hired by the mother in order to help her daughter get into a private school that's got quite high standards. So Philip introduces himself to Mia, who the little girl played by Shannon Mahina Gorman, who is making a debut acting role. It's a debut acting performance here, and she's fantastic. He says that he's a dad, and using the information that's fed to him prior to the meeting, he goes about trying to befriend the young girl, win her trust, and help her get into the school. At the same time that Philip's helping others, we kind of start to learn more about him and his life. He's really lonely, he's got no family of his own, and the brief times that he spends helping the others, it's clear that these people are actually helping him deal with the missing parts of his own life. It's a really, really heartwarming story with some genuinely emotional moments. Brendan Fraser's vulnerable, and he's cast perfectly as Philip. He feels like an outsider, but he's got a heart of gold and no one to share it with. He's really good at showing the pain behind his eyes without ever over-egging the performance, and it's kind of the subtlety of the role that really drives his story forward. There is also a side story of Aiko, played by Mari Yamamoto, who also works for the company. And she's dealing with her own jobs, one of which is playing the part of a mistress of a man who's been clearly cheating on his wife. This is known as an apology service, where effectively she has to apologise to the wife for what she has been allegedly doing with her husband. And it's something she's quite torn about, and she might not be entirely happy with doing the jobs that her boss Shinji, played by Takehiro Hira, has given her. Unfortunately, this story of Aiko's takes a bit of a backseat to Philip's tale, which is a shame because I would like to have seen more of her struggles, and it's probably the reason why I couldn't give this like the full 5-star treatment. The film is beautiful though, it's shot really well, and some of the later scenes which move beyond the city and it show the real beauty of Japan in all its glory. It's a lovely watch with some great performances and definitely worth checking out. That is Rental Family and currently sits at number 7 in the charts. At number 6 is Zootropolis 2, or Zootopia, depending on where you're from. Look it up, Google it. Some territories call it Zootropolis, some call it Zootopia. It's been in the charts now for 8 weeks, and it has become the highest grossing animated film of all time, taking £1.3 billion at the global box office, which is absolutely outstanding. But it's not surprising, as the film is fantastic. The first film was released back in 2016, and that was great, but this takes it to a whole new level. So now we've got Rabbit Cop Judy Hopps teaming up again with Fox Nick Wilde to crack a new case. They raid a smuggling ring and find some snake skin, but nobody believes them because there's been no snakes in Zootopia for years. Then there's a whole story about a family who are protecting an old journal which contains all the information about the weather walls that regulate Zootopia's climate zones. They come up against corruption and conspiracy. And obviously, if you don't know, Zootopia, the whole of Zootopia, it's all animals. Everybody's animals, no humans in it. And in the film, there's loads of frantic action, loads of laughs, and that's where Zootropolis's charm kind of really comes through. The animation is incredible. You could lose yourself for ages looking at all the puns and the visual gags throughout, and I love that. The animators must have really loved thinking up of how things would work and look in an all-animal world, and it's so well done, and that's why it's sticking around in the top 10 for so long. That is Zootropolis 2, which is number 6. At number 5 is Marty Supreme, which is an absolute assault on the censors for 160 minutes. I actually walked out of the cinema at the end, I must say, I didn't just walk out of the cinema. I walked out of the film with an headache. It's a new Josh Safdie film starring Timothée Chalamet, and it's a relentless battering of anger and noise which really hammered my brain. But it is a decent film too. The story's wild. Matty Mauser, played by Chalamet, is a bit of a chancer with a gift for ping pong. He knows that he's the best in the world, but that self-belief and confidence kind of contributes to his downfall on many occasions. He's potentially got a girl pregnant. He's living in other people's places, as well as grifting and pretending he's more high-powered than he is. He uses his charm and wit to mingle with the higher powers and famous actresses. So Gwyneth Paltrow plays a famous actress, and he kind of woos her. He alienates everybody by saying things without thinking and continuously comes across as not a nice person, but someone who we're kind of meant to be rooting to come out on top. But what happens is an absolute cacophony of carnage. He drops bombshells about Jews killed in the war. There's baths falling through ceilings in a scene that were literally straight out of Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. Marty Supreme, the film always feels like chaos reigns. And this for me where it's a bit of its downfall. While Chalamet's great in the main role, Josh Safdie's film, much like Uncut Gems before it, which he worked on with his brother, leans heavily on shouting and frantic dialogue to push the story forward. You always know what's going on, but I often felt like it just needed to be dialed down from 11. It will win a ton of Oscars though, and I wouldn't begrudge him, but I just don't ever want to see this film again. That's Marty Supreme at number 5. At number 4 is Avatar: Fire and Ash. It's still in there at number 4. It's been in the top 10 for the last 5 weeks and it's making a hell of a lot of money. But I've not actually seen it yet. I'm probably going to go see it this weekend. My daughter wants to see it, so I'm going to take her. I just don't know if Avatar fatigue is a real thing. They're ridiculously long films and quite a commitment, and I'm sure I don't know if it's worth it or not, but I'll report back anyway. Have you seen it? Have you seen Avatar: Fire and Ash? If you have, drop me a line. Tell me what you think. At number 3 is Hamnet, which is unfortunately the other film that I've not seen. It's a story about Shakespeare and his wife and his family and the tragedy that surrounded them. It's actually classed as a historical tragedy. And it's a story of what happened to Shakespeare and Agnes's son and what inspired him to write Hamlet. Jesse Buckley and Paul Mescal play the main parts. And I'll report back on this whenever I get a chance to see it, because I think there's probably a fair bit to say. You can also check out a lot of my reviews on Letterboxd, where my username is Famasser, or you can check out the Dave on Film blog, where I will post it up there when I watch it. Number 2 in the UK box office top 10 is The Housemaid. Based on a novel by Freda McFadden, The Housemaid is the latest big movie adaptation of a very popular book series, one which I haven't actually read, so I kind of went into this completely blind. Sydney Sweeney plays Millie, a girl on parole, living in a car and in desperate need of a job. She answers an advert for an housemaid at a big mansion, and she's interviewed by Nina Winchester, played by Amanda Seyfried, who almost immediately sets her on, despite Millie thinking that once she looked into her history she wouldn't, but she gets the job and she starts immediately. Upon arriving at the house, it's an absolute state, completely different to when she went to the interview, and she's shown round and shown her attic room, which she'll be living in whilst working there. It's a live-in job. She also meets Andrew Winchester, played by Brandon Skliner, and their daughter Cece, played by Indiana L. There's instantly seems something a little off about the whole situation, and kind of over the course of the next 2 hours of the film, everything unravels. Nina is neurotic, and she blames Millie for losing paperwork or not doing the right things, despite Millie doing exactly what Nina has told her to do. She accuses her of all manner of things, which are exasperated by the fact that there's clearly an attraction between Millie and Andrew. Then the middle part of the film happens. Now, I don't really want to talk about what happens in the middle, because I went in blind and I think you should too. Now, if you've read the book, obviously you know where this goes. But it is really well done. And what takes place, it all leads to a really twisty, exciting thriller, which raises a few laughs in a few places. It's sex-fueled in places as well, so be aware of that if you're watching with family members. And then carnage ensues and everything goes crazy, and it gets quite violent as well. It's a very glossy film. A friend of mine actually described it almost as if it was like a Channel 5 film, but I really enjoyed it. I thought Sydney Sweeney put in an alright performance, but it wasn't really a taxing one for her. Amanda Seyfried plays her part really well. She's psychotic and sweet in equal measures when she needs to be. And Sklein, as great as Andrew too, is oozing sex appeal on screen. I could actually hear some of the women in the cinema completely swooning over him whenever he had his top off on screen, which was way more than he should have done, really. Probably the same women, actually, who would have mourned if I'd have been swooning over Sydney Sweeney, but that's an argument for another day. But it's a lot of fun. It's 2 hours, 10 minutes, which is maybe about 20 minutes too long, but it's entertaining, though, and I am actually interested in going back and reading the source material books. So that is number 2 in the UK box office, and that is The Housemaid. And at number 1 in the UK box office top 10, without any surprises, is 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Back in 2002, the world was introduced to Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, a new kind of zombie horror written by Alex Garland, where a highly contagious rage virus had caused unfathomable destruction across the UK, with small pockets of people surviving and battling against hordes of infected. Cillian Murphy shot to fame in that film as Jim, a survivor who found himself alone and in a scary world where he had to survive. Following the success of that film came the 2007 film 28 Weeks Later, with Spanish director Juan Carlos Fresnadillo taking over from Boyle. It had a much bigger budget and it allowed for bigger set pieces and bigger action. The country had kind of started to repair itself with help from the US military, but everything ultimately goes crazy again, and that film ended with a virus spreading to France, and that's where everything ended. Until 2025, when Boyle and Gardner... Until 2025, when Boyle and Garland reunited with Cillian Murphy as executive producer to make 28 Years Later. So this was a film that came out last year, and we now found ourselves in a fully post-apocalyptic world with a young boy called Spike, played by Alfie Williams, being trained by his father, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, whilst also looking after his sick mother, played by Jodie Comer. They lived on an island that got cut off from the mainland daily and battled against zombies and a naked alpha. In the end, Spike goes out on his own to find a doctor for his mum, and he escapes with his mum and finds Dr. Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, who diagnoses his mum of having cancer and literally being on the verge of death. She asks him to put her out of her misery, which he does, and then it leaves Spike to kind of fend for himself before being captured by the Jimmies. Now, the Jimmies are a group of survivors who dress in tracksuits and Jimmy Savile-inspired wigs. Now, they were words that I never thought I'd use, but here we are. And they're doing all martial arts to the Teletubbies theme. The leader is Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell. We see him as a boy at the beginning of 28 Years Later, but now he's grown up and he idolises Savile and the Teletubbies and leads his little band of merry men and women with an unknown purpose. So right, we're up to date. That is the history of 28 Years Later. So now we're up to the brand new film, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Whew, let the insanity ensue. So 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple picks up right after the events of 28 Years Later. Spike is integrated into the Jimmies, where he's forced into a one-on-one battle with another one of them. Jimmy Crystal kind of refers to his little mob as his fingers. And when Spike beats his opponent, he becomes one of Jimmy Crystal's fingers and inherits the wig, and he's forced to go around with a group who terrorise other groups of survivors when they come across him. Jimmy Crystal's got very little mercy for those he comes across, ordering people to be skinned and killed, leaving bodies in his wake in his own psychotic quest for survival. All this is while telling people he is actually the son of Satan, and he's been given all these nasty tasks to carry out and must do as his demon lord instructs. The rest of the Jimmies follow his orders, but it's clear that one of them, Jimmy Inc., played by Erin Kellyman, is not entirely on his side, and she befriends Spike a little bit. Whilst all that's going on, Dr. Kelson, Ralph Fiennes, is living in his bone temple, and he encounters the Alpha, played by Chi Lewis Parry, and captures him with one of his tranquilizers and starts to experiment on him, trying out all different concoctions of drugs in order to try and counter the rage virus and ultimately find a cure from which everybody would benefit. He starts to make some breakthroughs during his sessions with the Alpha, who is named him Samson on account of his strength and his long hair. And just as he's kind of on the cusp of doing everything right and succeeding, The two worlds of the Jimmies and Dr. Kelson collide and bring together a final 20 minutes, which is possibly the most insane 20 minutes of film I have ever seen. It's funny, it's insane, it's chaotic, it's mind-blowing. You have to see it to believe it. It really is something to marvel at. Now, this film is really pushed forward by three really great performances. Firstly, a very notable mention for Lewis Parry as the Alpha. He spends most of the film naked. Now, apparently he's wearing a prosthetic penis, and his slow shift from kind of rage-induced zombie through effectively an awakening is really good to see. It's a really simple role, but it's done really effectively, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. Then there's O'Connell, who is just wild as Jimmy Crystal. If you saw the last 5 minutes of 28 Years Later, that's just a small taste of what's to come in this film. And if you saw him in Sinners, you know where O'Connell can go with his roles. He's absolutely relentless, and he's totally dialed into a role which is repulsive and nasty. All rolled up into a character who dresses like a man who, when the original film was set, was a bit of a hero to many, but ultimately became the face of absolute evil. And O'Connell embodies that role brilliantly. He offers what he calls charity to his captors, and the charity in question is just effectively fatal punishments. And this takes a huge nod to the charity work that was kind of the disguise of Savile in the real world. And I know a lot of people frowned upon this role and this visual image, and they were upset by the direction these films took and who they were idolising. But it works in the fact that they bring forth this embodiment of wrongness that he ultimately became. And I never really have had an issue with it. I think it works really well. And opposite O'Connell is Ralph Fiennes, who, taking a quote directly from the film and acknowledging another classic movie quote, dials it up to 11 with this performance. He's a loner living in his bone temple who starts to find good in the Alpha, and he absolutely relishes it. When the Alpha's lucid through a concoction of drugs, Dr. Kelson dances around with him, embraces him, and he's really living in the moment. And then towards the end of the film, in that final 20 minutes, he takes it all the way to a top with a performance that almost feels like you're watching Voldemort on acid. And I can never listen to Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast in quite the same way again. The Bone Temple is an absolute delight. It follows on perfectly from 28 Years Later, and both films really need to be seen together. And let's not forget that there is a third instalment due to arrive in the future. You're definitely not going to want to miss that one. I was thrilled with everything in this. Great performances from everyone. Utter disgust at the carnage that the Jimmies leave behind. And some genuinely funny light moments, which had quite a few people in the cinema laughing. I can't wait for part 3. Or is it part 5? Who knows anymore? Just get the next film out, please. That is number 1 in the UK box office top 10. And it is 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. And that's the top 10. So let's have a look at some of the other films that I've been watching recently. First up is Pillion, a film starring Alexander Skarsgård and Harry Melling. Now, you might remember Harry Melling. He played Dudley Dursley in the Harry Potter films. And in this, he plays a timid gay man called Colin, who encounters gay biker Ray, played by Skarsgård, who immediately identifies him as someone that he can take in as his submissive, making him obey his every command, both sexually and otherwise. It's a controlled dom-sub relationship, which it's uncomfortable to watch in places due to how he treats him. It's a really one-way relationship, which never really sits well with me, but it does help Colin gain experience and find his way in life. It's based on a book. Now, I enjoyed it to an extent, but I just felt like Ray's character was really not likeable, and ultimately the friendship is much more of an abusive relationship than a true dom-sub one. Something that I felt was a slight misfire in the story. Another film that I've watched recently is Song Sung Blue. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up with my parents listening to the likes of Neil Diamond, Barry Manilow and Buddy Holly in the car constantly. So we always had a radio station called Magic 828 that was always on the radio. So I was always exposed to what we would call the oldies. So a film about a Neil Diamond impersonator, also featuring a Buddy Holly impersonator, were quite a big draw. So it's actually based on a true story, and there's been a documentary of the same name. And it's the story of so it's based on a true story and on a documentary of the same name. It's the story of Mike Sardina, played by Hugh Jackman, who prefers to go by the name Lightning. He impersonates singer and entertainer Don Ho, who I'd never actually heard of. And following an incident at an event, he quits his impersonator job but bumps into fellow singer Claire, played by Kate Hudson, who's set to do a bunch of Patsy Cline songs. He falls in love with her voice and ultimately her, and she convinces him to start impersonating Neil Diamond as they start their relationship. As they grow together and become more successful as Lightning and Thunder, some tragedy hits which changes their lives forever, and the rest of the film is a struggle between family life and the quest for success. The fact that this story is true is really wild. Some of the events in the film are so outrageous and insane that it's hard to believe these things could happen to people in real life, but apparently they did. I love Hugh Jackman in almost anything he's in, and here he's brilliant. Along with Hudson, he sings all his own songs, something obviously that we know that he can do from his musical history. And he looks to be thoroughly relishing every moment of screen time, eating up all the songs and becoming one with them. He expresses the pain and anguish when needed, as well as the joy of life when everything's going right. It's a really top-notch performance for someone clearly loving the part he gets to play here. Kate Hudson is an absolute delight too. She's from the joyful singing of the Patsy Cline songs and the Neil Diamond ones with Jackman. She's really, really brilliant in this. And when the horrible moment happens part of the way through the film, she really takes it to the next level, and her character arc is incredible, especially considering this is a true story. It's a great story, it's really well told, it's gritty and horrible in places, but isn't that just life in general? So there we are, plenty of films that are in the cinema now, things that are out and upcoming. So there we are, plenty of films that are out in the cinema now for you to go and watch, or some that you may be able to pick up at home too. I'm going to be doing a special after the Oscar nominations are released this week, as well as getting Althea and Megan back to put them in front of another film they've not seen and talk to them to see what they think about it. I already know what film I'm going to pick for them. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it so you don't miss an episode. You can follow me on Facebook, search for Dave on Film, or Instagram with username Dave on Film Reviews, or check out my blog at daveonfilm.co.uk. I'll be back soon, and remember to keep your time circuits on and your flux capacitor fluxing. See you soon.